The evening air in downtown Seattle carried the usual mix of coffee aromas and distant traffic sounds as Sarah Martinez walked briskly toward the parking garage. Her nursing shift at Seattle General had run longer than expected, and the October darkness had already settled over the city streets. At 26, Sarah had grown accustomed to these late-night walks from the hospital, but tonight felt different somehow. She clutched her purse tighter as she noticed 4 men in military fatigues gathered near the entrance to the parking structure. Their uniforms looked authentic, complete with name tags and unit patches, but something about their posture and the way they were scanning the area made her instincts fire warning signals. Sarah had grown up in a military family and could usually spot genuine service members from a mile away, but these men carried themselves with an arrogance that felt wrong. The tallest of the group, a man with closely cropped blonde hair and sergeant stripes on his sleeve, noticed her approach first. He nudged his companions and pointed in her direction. Sarah's step faltered slightly as she realized they had positioned themselves deliberately to block the main entrance to the garage. Her car was parked on the 3rd level, and this was the only way in or out of the structure. "Evening, miss," the blonde sergeant called out as she approached. His voice carried a false friendliness that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Looks like you're heading home pretty late. These streets can be dangerous for a pretty girl like you." Sarah forced a polite smile and tried to move past them toward the entrance. "I'm fine, thank you. Just heading to my car." The second man, shorter but more muscular, stepped sideways to partially block her path. His uniform bore corporal stripes, and he had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Now hold on there, sweetheart. We're just being friendly. No need to rush off so quick." The third soldier, a lanky man with nervous energy, chimed in with a laugh that sounded forced. "Yeah, we're celebrating tonight. Just got back from deployment. Maybe you'd like to join us for a drink? There's a nice little bar just around the corner." Sarah's heart began to pound as she realized the situation was escalating beyond simple unwanted attention. These men had clearly been drinking, and their body language was becoming increasingly aggressive. The fourth member of their group, a heavy-set man with cruel eyes, had moved to position himself behind her while she was focused on the others. "I appreciate the offer, but I really need to get home," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. She attempted to step around them again, but the blonde sergeant reached out and lightly touched her arm. "Come on now, don't be like that," he said, his grip tightening slightly. "We've been overseas for 8 months. The least you could do is show some appreciation for our service." Sarah pulled her arm away sharply. "Please don't touch me. I need to go." The corporal laughed and exchanged glances with his companions. "She's feisty. I like that in a woman. Makes things more interesting." The parking garage entrance was only 10 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. Sarah calculated her options quickly. Her phone was in her purse, but she doubted she could reach it and call for help before they stopped her. The street was relatively empty at this hour, and the few pedestrians she could see were too far away to help. "Look," she said, trying a different approach, "I work at the hospital. I'm expected at home. People will be looking for me if I don't show up." The nervous soldier laughed again. "The hospital? That's perfect. You must know all about taking care of people. We could really use some medical attention." The way he said it made Sarah's stomach turn. She realized these men weren't just drunk and obnoxious, they had planned this encounter. They had been waiting for someone exactly like her, a woman alone, vulnerable, with no immediate escape route. The heavy-set man behind her spoke for the first time, his voice low and menacing. "Why don't we continue this conversation somewhere more private? My buddy here has a hotel room just a few blocks away." Sarah's fear spiked into genuine terror as she felt him move closer behind her. She could smell alcohol on his breath and feel the heat radiating from his body. The blonde sergeant still had a loose grip on her arm, and the other two had positioned themselves to block any escape route toward the street. "I said no," Sarah said more firmly, pulling against the sergeant's grip. "Let go of me right now." The corporal's false smile vanished, replaced by something much darker. "Or what? You're going to scream?" This is downtown Seattle on a Tuesday night. Half the people walking around here are either drunk or homeless. Nobody's going to care about a little noise. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She had taken a self-defense class in college, but that was years ago, and these were trained soldiers, even if they weren't acting like honorable ones. She was outnumbered 4-1, and they clearly had no intention of letting her simply walk away. The sergeant's grip tightened on her arm, and she could see the excitement building in his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen," he said quietly. "You're going to come with us to that hotel room. We're going to have ourselves a little party. And, if you're smart about it, nobody gets hurt." "And, if I refuse?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. The corporal stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Then, things get a lot less pleasant for you. But, either way, you're coming with us." Sarah felt the situation crystallizing around her like ice. These men had made their decision, and her wishes were no longer part of the equation. She was about to open her mouth to scream, hoping against hope that someone would hear and care enough to help, when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A figure emerged from the shadows near the parking garage entrance. At first glance, he appeared to be just another pedestrian, but something about the way he moved caught Sarah's attention. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a dark jacket. But he carried himself with a particular kind of confidence that Sarah recognized from her military upbringing. The four soldiers were so focused on her that they hadn't noticed the newcomer. Sarah tried not to look directly at him, afraid that drawing attention to his presence might escalate the situation further. But she felt a tiny spark of hope kindle in her chest. The stranger continued to approach, his footsteps silent on the concrete sidewalk. Sarah could see him better now. He was probably in his early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that were taking in the scene with obvious understanding. Most people would have hurried past, not wanting to get involved in what clearly looked like trouble. But this man was moving with purpose. "You know what?" Sarah said loudly, hoping to buy time and possibly alert the stranger to the situation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I'm not interested in going anywhere with you." The blonde sergeant's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Listen, lady, we've been polite long enough. You're coming with us, and that's final." The corporal reached toward her with his free hand, but before he could make contact, a calm voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Is there a problem here?" All five of them turned toward the voice. The stranger had approached to within conversation distance, his hands relaxed at his sides but his posture alert. Sarah noticed immediately that he moved like her father had, like someone accustomed to violence but completely comfortable with it. The nervous soldier was the first to speak. "No problem here, buddy. Just talking to our friend. Move along." The stranger's eyes met Sarah's for just a moment, and she saw intelligence and assessment there. He was reading the situation, cataloging details, making decisions. When he looked back at the soldiers, his expression remained neutral but somehow more dangerous. "I don't think the lady wants to talk," he said quietly. "Maybe you should respect that." The heavy-set man behind Sarah laughed. "And maybe you should mind your own business before you get hurt." The stranger smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Trust me, friend. I'm exactly where I want to be." Sarah felt the dynamic of the situation shifting. The four soldiers were no longer completely focused on her, their attention was divided between their original target and this new potential threat. She sensed that whatever was about to happen next would determine whether she went home safely or became another statistic. The blonde sergeant released her arm and took a step toward the stranger. "Look, pal, we don't want any trouble. But this doesn't concern you. Walk away now, and nobody gets hurt." The stranger didn't move. "Actually, it concerns me quite a bit. See, I don't like watching women get threatened by men who should know better." The tension in the air became almost tangible. Sarah realized she was holding her breath, watching this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to potentially save her from a nightmare. She wondered who he was and what kind of training or background gave him the confidence to face down 4 aggressive soldiers without showing any sign of fear. The corporal cracked his knuckles. "Last warning, hero. This is none of your business." The stranger's smile widened slightly. "Actually, gentlemen, protecting civilians is exactly my business." Something in his tone made all 4 soldiers pause. Sarah saw uncertainty flicker across their faces for the first time since this encounter had begun. They were beginning to realize that they might have misjudged their new opponent. The stranger continued speaking, his voice still calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to the lady, and then you're going to walk away. You're going to go back to whatever bar you crawled out of, sleep off whatever you've been drinking, and tomorrow you're going to remember that the uniform you wear is supposed to mean something." The blonde sergeant's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "You don't know who you're talking to, friend. We're United States soldiers." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," the stranger replied. "The question is, do you know who you're talking to?" The parking garage entrance was still only a few feet away, but Sarah found herself frozen in place, watching this confrontation unfold. Something about the stranger's confidence and the way he carried himself suggested that he wasn't just a good Samaritan who happened to be walking by. This man was dangerous in a completely different way than the soldiers threatening her. The nervous soldier shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Come on, guys. Maybe we should just go. This isn't worth the trouble." But the blonde sergeant was beyond listening to reason. His pride had been challenged in front of his men, and he clearly couldn't let that stand. "No way. This punk thinks he can order us around? I don't think so." The stranger's posture remained relaxed, but Sarah noticed his weight shift slightly onto the balls of his feet. Whatever was about to happen, he was ready for it. She had a sudden, vivid memory of watching her father prepare for a sparring match during one of his martial arts competitions. The same focused calm, the same coiled readiness. "Last chance, gentlemen," the stranger said quietly. "Walk away now, and we can all pretend this never happened." The corporal stepped forward aggressively. "Or what? You think you can take all 4 of us?" The stranger's smile never wavered. "I think you'd be surprised what I can do." Sarah realized she was about to witness something that would change her life forever. This quiet stranger who had emerged from the shadows was about to face down 4 men to protect someone he didn't even know. She wondered who he was and what kind of person chose to walk toward danger instead of away from it. The blonde sergeant made the decision for all of them. "That's it. We're done talking." As he started to move toward the stranger, Sarah held her breath and prepared to run for the parking garage entrance the moment she had an opening. She had no idea what the stranger was capable of, but she had a feeling she was about to find out. The blonde sergeant lunged forward with surprising speed for someone who had been drinking, but the stranger was no longer where he had been standing. Sarah watched in amazement as the man who had come to her aid seemed to simply flow around the sergeant's charge, using the soldier's own momentum against him. Within seconds, the sergeant found himself face-first against the brick wall of the parking garage, his arm twisted behind his back in what looked like a professionally applied restraint hold. "Stay down," the stranger said calmly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of command experience. "And think carefully about your next move." The corporal and the nervous soldier exchanged glances, clearly not expecting their leader to be neutralized so quickly and efficiently. The heavy-set man who had been standing behind Sarah took a step back, reassessing the situation with new eyes. Sarah used the momentary confusion to put distance between herself and her would-be attackers, moving closer to the parking garage entrance. As she did, she got a better look at the stranger who had intervened on her behalf. Now that she could see him clearly, she noticed details that had been hidden in the shadows. The way he held himself spoke of extensive combat training, and, despite his civilian clothes, everything about his bearing suggested military background. The corporal was the first to recover from his shock. "Let him go, or you're going to regret it." The stranger glanced at him with what could only be described as professional assessment. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in. Your friend here is going to apologize to the lady, and then, all four of you are going to leave. Quietly. Like hell, the heavy-set soldier growled, pulling something from his pocket. Sarah's heart lurched as she realized it was a knife, a military-issue tactical blade that caught the streetlight with deadly promise. The stranger's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his grip on the sergeant shift slightly. "That's a very poor decision," he said quietly. "I strongly recommend you put that away." The nervous soldier was beginning to panic. "Put it away, man. This is getting way out of hand." But the heavy-set man was beyond listening. The alcohol, the adrenaline, and the humiliation of watching their leader get subdued by one man had pushed him past rational thought. "Nobody makes us look like fools," he snarled, advancing with the knife held low and ready. What happened next would replay in Sarah's memory for years to come. The stranger released the sergeant, who slumped against the wall, and turned to face the knife-wielding attacker. For a moment, time seemed suspended as the two men faced each other across 10 feet of concrete sidewalk. The heavy-set soldier feinted left, then lunged right, the blade aimed at the stranger's ribs. But the stranger had read the move before it began. He stepped inside the attack, his left hand controlling the knife arm while his right delivered a precise strike to a pressure point on his attacker's neck. The heavy-set man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, the knife clattering harmlessly across the pavement. The corporal and nervous soldier stood frozen, staring at their unconscious teammate. The entire encounter had lasted less than 10 seconds, and their knife-wielding companion had been neutralized without the stranger even breathing hard. "He's alive," the stranger said calmly, as if reading their thoughts. "He'll wake up in a few minutes with a headache and, hopefully, some better judgment." Sarah found herself staring at this man who had appeared from nowhere and single-handedly turned what could have been the worst night of her life into something completely different. Who was he? How had he learned to fight like that? And why had he chosen to get involved when most people would have walked away? The blonde sergeant was slowly picking himself up from the wall, his face a mixture of pain and humiliation. The way he moved suggested the stranger's restraint technique had been both effective and controlled enough to neutralize him without causing permanent damage. "This isn't over," the sergeant muttered, but there was no real conviction behind the words. The fight had gone out of him along with his confidence. The stranger's voice remained calm and reasonable. "Actually, it is over. You gentlemen are going to collect your friend here, walk away, and never bother this lady again. And you're going to remember that wearing that uniform carries responsibility." The corporal was staring at the stranger with something approaching recognition in his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The stranger smiled, but it was a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who takes military honors seriously." Sarah noticed the way the four soldiers reacted to that statement. Even through their alcohol-fueled bravado and humiliation, something in the stranger's tone had penetrated. They were looking at him with new understanding, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. The nervous soldier was the first to break. "Come on, guys. Let's just go. This whole thing was stupid from the beginning." He moved to help the heavy-set man, who was beginning to stir on the ground. The corporal joined him, shooting wary glances at the stranger as they lifted their groggy teammate to his feet. The blonde sergeant straightened his uniform with as much dignity as he could muster. "This doesn't end here," he said, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. The stranger stepped closer to him, and, when he spoke, his voice carried a tone that made even Sarah shiver. "Yes, it does. And if I ever hear that you've threatened or harmed another civilian, I will find you. And, next time, I won't be nearly so gentle." There was something in that promise that transcended mere threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who had both the ability and willingness to follow through. The sergeant's face paled despite the darkness, and he took an involuntary step backward. Within minutes, the four soldiers were shuffling away down the street, half carrying their unconscious teammate between them. Their earlier swagger had been replaced by the hunched posture of men who had been thoroughly humbled and wanted nothing more than to disappear. Sarah watched them go, hardly believing the transformation she had witnessed. 20 minutes ago, she had been certain she was about to become the victim of a terrible crime. Now her attackers were retreating in defeat, neutralized by a single man who had appeared out of nowhere like some kind of guardian angel. As the soldiers disappeared around a corner, the stranger turned his attention to Sarah. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, probably in his early 30s, with intelligent dark eyes and a face that was handsome in a rugged, weathered way. There was something about his features that suggested both strength and kindness, though she had just witnessed how dangerous he could be when necessary. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice much gentler now than it had been during the confrontation. Sarah realized she was trembling, adrenaline and relief flooding through her system in equal measure. Yes, I think so. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." The stranger's expression softened. "You don't need to think about that. It's over now." Sarah looked down at her hands and noticed they were shaking. The full impact of what had almost happened was beginning to hit her. "I work at the hospital," she said, not entirely sure why she was sharing that information. "I walk this route almost every night. I've never had anything like this happen before." "It shouldn't have happened tonight either," the stranger replied, and there was anger in his voice, not directed at her, but at the situation itself. Those men were a disgrace to their uniforms. Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more closely. "You're military too, aren't you?" The stranger hesitated for just a moment before answering. "Navy. Special operations." That explains so much. The way he moved, the confidence in the face of overwhelming odds, the precise application of force that neutralized threats without causing unnecessary harm. Sarah had grown up around military personnel, but she had never seen anything quite like what she had just witnessed. "Navy SEALs?" she asked quietly. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement that carried enormous weight. Sarah felt a new understanding of what had just happened. Those 4 soldiers hadn't just been outfought by a stranger, they had been completely outclassed by one of the most elite warriors in the world. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Chen. And you?" "Sarah Martinez. I'm a nurse at Seattle General." She paused, still trying to process everything that had happened. "I can't believe you just. I mean, there were 4 of them, and one of them had a knife." Marcus's expression grew serious. That knife was the only real danger in the whole situation. Everything else was just intimidation and poor decisions fueled by alcohol. Sarah shook her head in amazement. "You made it look so easy." "Training," Marcus said simply. "Lots of training. And they weren't really soldiers, not in any way that matters. Real soldiers don't threaten innocent civilians." The parking garage entrance was just a few feet away now, and Sarah realized she should probably get to her car and go home. But she found herself reluctant to end this conversation with the man who had just saved her from what could have been a nightmare. "Can I?" She started, then stopped, feeling foolish. "I mean, is there any way I can thank you? Buy you coffee or dinner or something?" Marcus smiled, and this time it was a warm, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah. I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time." "But I want to," Sarah insisted. "What you did tonight. I can't just walk away and pretend it didn't happen." Marcus studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to decide something. "Are you sure you're okay? No injuries, no shock?" Sarah took inventory of herself. She was still shaking slightly, and her heart was beating faster than normal, but she felt remarkably clear-headed considering what had just happened. "I'm okay. Scared, but okay." "Scared is normal," Marcus said. "Scared means you understand how serious the situation was. But it's over now, and you're safe." Sarah looked toward the parking garage, then back at Marcus. "Will you walk me to my car? I know those guys are gone, but..." "Of course," Marcus said immediately. "Which level?" "3rd floor." They walked together through the parking garage entrance, their footsteps echoing in the concrete structure. Sarah found herself studying Marcus as they walked, trying to understand this man who had risked his own safety for a complete stranger. There was something about his presence that made her feel completely safe, even in the isolated parking garage that had seemed so threatening just minutes before. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they approached the elevator. "Sure. Why did you get involved? I mean, most people would have just kept walking. Called the police maybe, but not confronted four armed men." Marcus was quiet for a moment as they waited for the elevator to arrive. "I took an oath," he said finally. "To protect and defend. That doesn't stop applying just because I'm not in uniform." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. Sarah pressed the button for the third floor, then turned to look at Marcus in the fluorescent lighting. "How long have you been a SEAL?" 8 years active duty. I'm on leave right now, visiting my sister here in Seattle." "Do you live here?" "Virginia Beach. Naval Special Warfare Development Group." Sarah's eyes widened. Even her limited knowledge of military structure was enough to recognize that as one of the most elite units in the entire military. "Your DevGru?" Marcus looked surprised that she knew the terminology. "Your military knowledge is better than most civilians. My father was Army Special Forces. Retired colonel. He always said the Navy SEALs were the only other unit he'd trust to watch his back." "Smart man," Marcus said with genuine respect. "Green Berets and SEALs have always had a mutual respect. We train together sometimes." The elevator dinged softly as it reached the third floor. Sarah led the way to her car, a practical Honda Civic that looked almost comically ordinary after the evening's dramatic events. As she fumbled for her keys, she realized her hands were still trembling slightly. Marcus noticed her difficulty and gently took the keys from her shaking hands. "Here, let me." He unlocked her car and handed the keys back, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Sarah was surprised by the warmth of his touch and the sense of strength and steadiness it conveyed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to repay anything," Marcus replied. "Just promise me you'll be more careful walking alone at night. Maybe vary your route, or see if the hospital can provide security escorts." Sarah nodded. "I will. I promise." She hesitated, then made a decision. "Marcus, I meant what I said about dinner. Or coffee. Not because I owe you, but because I'd like to see you again." Marcus looked genuinely surprised by her directness. "Sarah, you just went through a traumatic experience. You might feel differently tomorrow." "I might," Sarah agreed. "But I don't think so. You saved my life tonight. More than that, you risked your own safety for someone you didn't even know. That says something about who you are as a person." Marcus studied her face in the dim parking garage lighting. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "Will you at least think about it?" After a long moment, Marcus smiled. "Give me your phone." Sarah handed him her phone, and he quickly entered his contact information. When he handed it back, she saw he had listed himself simply as Marcus. "Call me when you get home safely," he said. "And then, if you still want to have coffee tomorrow, call me then, too." Sarah felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth despite everything that had happened. "I will." She got into her car and started the engine, rolling down the window before she pulled away. "Marcus?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything." Marcus stepped back from the car. "Drive carefully, Sarah. And remember what I said about calling when you get home." As Sarah drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror and saw Marcus standing in the parking garage, watching to make sure she got away safely. Something told her that this chance encounter with a Navy SEAL would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Sarah's hands were steady on the steering wheel as she drove through the quiet Seattle streets toward her apartment, but her mind was racing with everything that had just happened. Every few minutes, she found herself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the 4 soldiers following her, even though she knew Marcus had sent them away thoroughly defeated and humiliated. The radio played softly in the background, some late-night jazz program that normally would have relaxed her after a long shift at the hospital. Tonight, though, the music seemed surreal, as if it belonged to a different world than the one where she had just been rescued by a Navy SEAL from what could have been a terrible assault. As she pulled into her apartment complex's parking lot, Sarah realized that her perception of safety had been fundamentally altered. This quiet residential neighborhood where she had lived for 3 years suddenly felt different. The shadows between the buildings seemed deeper, the empty parking spaces more ominous. She found herself scanning the area carefully before getting out of her car, something she had never done before. Her apartment was on the second floor of a well-maintained building that housed mostly young professionals like herself. Sarah climbed the stairs slowly, still processing the evening's events. By the time she reached her door, she had come to a startling realization: the most significant thing that had happened tonight wasn't the attack itself, but her reaction to the man who had saved her. Marcus Chan. Even his name had a solid, dependable quality that matched everything else about him. Sarah had met plenty of men in her 26 years, but none who had made such an immediate and powerful impression. There had been something about the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence and competence he had displayed, that was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Once inside her apartment, Sarah went through her usual routine of checking the locks and setting her purse and keys on the kitchen counter. But nothing felt usual anymore. Everything was filtered through the lens of what had almost happened and what had actually happened instead. She kept thinking about the moment when Marcus had appeared from the shadows, the way he had assessed the situation instantly and acted without hesitation. She poured herself a glass of water and sat on her couch, finally, allowing herself to really think about what could have happened if Marcus hadn't been there. The 4 soldiers had made their intentions clear enough. They hadn't been interested in conversation or even simple harassment. They had been planning something much worse, and they had chosen her as their target simply because she was alone and vulnerable. Sarah shuddered and pushed those thoughts away. Marcus had been right, there was no point in dwelling on what might have happened. The important thing was that it hadn't happened, thanks to his intervention. She picked up her phone and found Marcus's contact information. He had asked her to call when she got home safely, and she realized that beyond just keeping a promise, she genuinely wanted to hear his voice again. There was something comforting about the calm certainty with which he spoke, as if his presence could extend through the phone line and make her apartment feel secure again. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Sarah? Are you home safe?" Just hearing his voice brought an immediate sense of relief. "Yes, I'm home. I just got in. How are you feeling?" Sometimes the shock hits later, after the adrenaline wears off. Sarah considered the question seriously. "I'm okay. Shaken up, but okay. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Don't," Marcus said firmly but gently. "That's not a productive line of thinking. Focus on the fact that you're safe now." "You're right," Sarah said, though she knew it would be easier said than done. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think they'll try to find me? I mean, they know I work at the hospital." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could almost hear him thinking through the possibilities. "No, I don't think so." They were drunk, humiliated, and probably terrified about potential consequences. The last thing they want is more attention or trouble. "But, if you're worried, there are precautions we can discuss." The way he said "we" made Sarah feel immediately better. It implied that he wasn't going to simply disappear from her life after one dramatic encounter. "What kind of precautions?" she asked. "Varying your schedule and routes, coordinating with hospital security, maybe some basic self-defense training." "Nothing dramatic, just common-sense safety measures." Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. "Would you teach me? The self-defense, I mean?" Marcus laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "I'd be happy to. Though I have to warn you, my teaching methods are probably a bit more intense than your average self-defense class." "I think I can handle it," Sarah said. "After tonight, I want to be prepared if something like this ever happens again." Fair enough. We can start with basics and see how you do. There was a comfortable pause in the conversation, and Sarah realized she was reluctant to hang up. Talking to Marcus made her feel connected to the strength and security he represented. But she also knew he had probably had a long day and needed his rest. I should let you go, she said reluctantly. But, Marcus? About that coffee I mentioned. What about it? I meant what I said. I'd like to see you again, and not just for self-defense lessons. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sarah, you've been through a traumatic experience tonight. Are you sure you're thinking clearly about this? Sarah had been expecting that question, and she had already thought through her answer. I know it might seem like some kind of hero worship or trauma response, but it's not. There's something about you that I'm drawn to, and it's not just because you saved me tonight. What is it then? Marcus asked, and she could hear genuine curiosity in his voice. Sarah considered how to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. The way you handled that situation. Not just the physical part, though that was impressive enough. But you never lost control, never got angry or violent unnecessarily. You did exactly what needed to be done to protect me, nothing more and nothing less. That takes a special kind of person. It takes training, Marcus said, but Sarah could hear that he was pleased by her observation. No, it takes character. Training teaches you how to fight. Character determines when and why you choose to fight. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You're more perceptive than most people I meet. My father always said that military service reveals character, it doesn't create it. You can teach someone to be a soldier, but you can't teach them to be a good person. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. He would have liked you. Another comfortable silence stretched between them, and Sarah felt herself relaxing for the first time since the encounter in the parking garage. There was something about Marcus that made her feel safe and understood in a way that was entirely new to her. All right, Marcus said finally. Coffee tomorrow. But I want you to promise me something. What? If you wake up tomorrow and decide this was all just a reaction to what happened tonight, you'll be honest about it. No obligations, no guilt. Fair enough? Sarah smiled. Fair enough. But, Marcus? I don't think I'm going to change my mind. We'll see. What time do you get off work tomorrow? I'm working a day shift. I'll be done by 4. There's a coffee shop called Grounded on Pine Street, near the hospital. Do you know it? I know it. 5 o'clock? Perfect. And, Sarah? Yes? Get some sleep. You've had a hell of a night. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her living room for a while, replaying the conversation in her mind. She was surprised by how easy it had been to talk to Marcus, how natural their conversation had felt despite the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. Most of the men she had dated would have been eager to take credit for their heroics, to milk the situation for maximum effect. Marcus had been more concerned with her well-being than with impressing her. She finally went to bed around midnight, but sleep was elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself reliving different moments from the evening. The initial fear when she realized the soldiers were blocking her path. The escalating tension as their intentions became clear. The moment of terror when the heavy-set man had pulled the knife. And then, Marcus's arrival, the quick, efficient way he had neutralized the threats and taken control of the situation. Sarah had never seen anyone move with such controlled precision, such absolute confidence in their abilities. It had been like watching a master craftsman at work, except the craft was violence and the workshop was a downtown Seattle sidewalk. But what impressed her most, as she lay in her bed thinking about it, was what Marcus hadn't done. He hadn't hurt anyone unnecessarily, hadn't humiliated the soldiers beyond what was required to end the situation, hadn't tried to intimidate or terrorize them. He had used exactly the amount of force needed to protect her and no more. Sarah finally drifted off to sleep around 2 in the morning, and her dreams were filled with images of dark-haired men with steady hands and calm voices standing between her and dangers she couldn't quite see. She woke up the next morning with a clarity of purpose that surprised her. The events of the previous night hadn't left her traumatized or fearful. Instead, they had crystallized something important in her mind. Life was uncertain and dangerous in ways she had never fully appreciated. But there were people like Marcus in the world, people who chose to stand against that danger and protect others. During her shift at the hospital, Sarah found herself thinking about her upcoming coffee date with unusual anticipation. Her colleagues noticed her distracted mood, but she deflected their questions with vague references to meeting someone new. She wasn't ready to explain the full story of how that meeting had come about. As 4 o'clock approached, Sarah felt a flutter of nervous excitement that had nothing to do with trauma or hero worship. She was looking forward to seeing Marcus again, to learning more about this man who had appeared in her life like something out of a movie. She wanted to know about his background, his family, his life outside of military service. But, more than that, she wanted to understand the man behind the warrior. The gentle tone he had used when speaking to her, the genuine concern for her well-being, the way he had offered to teach her self-defense without any ulterior motives. There was depth to Marcus Chen that went far beyond his impressive combat skills. Grounded was a small, cozy coffee shop that Sarah had passed many times but never visited. As she pushed open the door at exactly 5 o'clock, she scanned the interior and immediately spotted Marcus at a corner table. He was wearing jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt, and he looked up when she entered, offering a smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Right on time," he said as she approached the table. "Military punctuality," Sarah replied with a grin. "My father's influence." Marcus stood as she approached, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed natural rather than forced. "How was your shift?" "Long," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from him. "But, good. I kept thinking about last night, though." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Second thoughts?" Sarah shook her head emphatically. "Not about coffee with you. But I did spend a lot of time thinking about what happened, and what it means." "What does it mean to you?" Sarah paused, trying to organize her thoughts. "It means I've been living in a bubble. I thought I was being careful, but I was really just being naive. I walked the same route every night, at the same time, completely predictable and vulnerable." Marcus nodded. "Recognition is the first step toward changing that. And it means," Sarah continued, "that I met someone remarkable under the worst possible circumstances. Someone who risked his own safety for a stranger without hesitation." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Sarah said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have called the police and hoped for the best. You stepped into danger deliberately because it was the right thing to do." The barista approached their table, and they ordered their drinks, coffee for Marcus, tea for Sarah. As they waited for their order to arrive, Sarah studied Marcus's face more carefully than she had been able to the night before. He was handsome in a rugged way, with intelligent dark eyes and strong features that spoke of mixed heritage. But there was also something guarded about his expression, as if he was used to keeping his thoughts and emotions carefully controlled. "Tell me about yourself," Sarah said when their drinks arrived. "Not the military stuff, unless you want to. Just, who is Marcus Chen when he's not saving women from soldiers in parking garages?" Marcus smiled at her directness. "Not much to tell, really. I grew up in San Francisco, youngest of 3 kids. My parents immigrated from Taiwan when I was 2. My father's an engineer, my mother's a teacher." "What made you join the Navy?" 9/11, Marcus said simply. "I was a senior in high school, planning to study engineering like my father. But, after the attacks, I felt like I needed to do something more direct. Something that mattered." Sarah understood that motivation completely. Her father had felt the same pull toward service, though his had come during Vietnam. "Do you regret it?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "No. It's been hard sometimes, and I've seen things that I wish I hadn't." But I've also been part of operations that saved lives and made a real difference.
That matters to me. How much longer do you plan to stay in? I'm not sure. I'm at a decision point, actually.
My current enlistment is up in 6 months, and I'm trying to decide whether to re-up or try something different. Sarah sensed there was more to that story than Marcus was sharing, but she didn't push.
What would you do if you left the Navy? Maybe law enforcement. FBI, maybe, or Secret Service. Something that would let me use my training to protect people.
Always protecting people, Sarah observed.
That seems to be a theme with you. Marcus looked slightly embarrassed. I suppose it is. My sister says I have a hero complex. Your sister lives here in Seattle?
Yeah, she's a software engineer at Microsoft.
Married, 2 kids. I'm visiting them for a couple of weeks. Sarah felt a small stab of disappointment. So you're not staying long?
That depends, Marcus said, meeting her eyes directly. I might have found a reason to extend my visit. The implication was clear, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken.
Is that so?
Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her face.
Sarah, I have to be honest with you. I don't do casual dating.
Military life doesn't really allow for it, and my job is too demanding for relationships that don't have real potential.
Sarah appreciated his directness, even if it was a bit intimidating. What are you saying?
I'm saying that if we're going to do this, if we're going to see where this goes, I need to know that you're serious about it. Not because of what happened last night, but in spite of it.
Sarah met his gaze steadily.
I told you last night that this isn't about hero worship or trauma bonding.
I meant that. Then, what is it about?
Sarah thought about how to put her feelings into words. It's about meeting someone who embodies the kind of character and integrity that I thought was mostly fictional.
It's about finding someone who makes me feel safe, not because he's physically capable, though that doesn't hurt, but because I can trust him completely.
Marcus was quiet for a long moment.
That's a lot to live up to. You're already living up to it, Sarah replied. The question is whether you want to keep doing it.
Marcus smiled, and this time it was a smile of genuine warmth and possibility.
Yeah, I think I do.
As they continued talking, Sarah felt a sense of rightness about the situation that surprised her with its intensity. This wasn't how she had imagined meeting the man who might change her life. But, sitting across from Marcus in the cozy coffee shop, watching the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his family or his work, she found herself thinking that maybe the best things in life did come when you least expected them. The coffee shop began to fill with the evening crowd, and Sarah realized they had been talking for over an hour. Time had seemed to compress around their conversation, the way it did when two people discovered an unexpected connection. I should probably let you get back to your sister's family, Sarah said reluctantly.
Actually, Marcus said, I was hoping you might let me buy you dinner.
If you're not too tired from your shift. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat.
I'd like that.
But I should probably go home and change first. These scrubs aren't exactly dinner attire. You look fine to me, Marcus said, and the sincerity in his voice made Sarah blush.
But, if you'd be more comfortable changing, that's fine too. I can pick you up in an hour?
Sarah gave him her address and watched as he carefully entered it into his phone. Everything about his manner suggested reliability and attention to detail, qualities that were becoming more attractive to her by the minute. As they stood to leave, Marcus placed a gentle hand on her elbow.
Sarah? Yes? Thank you for giving me a chance. I know the circumstances weren't ideal. Sarah smiled up at him. Marcus, I think the circumstances were perfect. After all, how else would I have learned that there are still real heroes in the world? As they walked out of the coffee shop together, Sarah realized that her life had taken a fundamental turn in the past 24 hours. The frightening encounter that could have been a nightmare had instead become the beginning of what she was increasingly certain would be the most important relationship of her life. 3 months later, Sarah found herself standing in the kitchen of Marcus's temporary apartment, watching him prepare dinner with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else in his life.
His sister had convinced him to rent a month-to-month place instead of staying in her guest room indefinitely, especially after it became clear that his brief visit to Seattle was extending into something much more permanent. The transformation in Sarah's life had been gradual but profound. The self-defense lessons Marcus had promised had become a regular part of their routine, though they had evolved into something much more comprehensive than simple personal protection techniques. Marcus had taught her situational awareness, threat assessment, and basic combat skills with the patience and thoroughness of a professional instructor. More importantly, he had helped her rebuild her confidence in her own ability to handle dangerous situations. But the physical training was only part of what had changed. Sarah had discovered that dating a Navy SEAL was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Marcus approached their relationship with the same intensity and commitment he brought to his military service.
When he said he didn't do casual dating, he had meant it completely.
Every decision, every plan, every gesture was considered and intentional.
It had been overwhelming at first.
Sarah was used to men who played games, who said one thing and meant another, who made promises they had no intention of keeping. Marcus was the opposite of all that. He said what he meant what he said, and followed through on every commitment he made.
It was like learning to breathe different air.
The dinner Marcus was preparing was a celebration of sorts. Earlier that week, he had made his decision about re-enlisting. After 8 years of active duty and countless deployments, Marcus Chen was leaving the Navy to start a new chapter of his life in Seattle. He had accepted a position with the FBI's Seattle field office, specializing in counter-terrorism and hostage rescue operations. "The sauce is almost ready," Marcus said, stirring the contents of a pan that smelled incredible.
"How was your day at the hospital?" Sarah smiled as she set the table.
This had become their evening ritual, sharing the details of their days while Marcus cooked and she helped with the preparations.
"Busy. Dr. Reynolds asked me to consider applying for the charge nurse position on the trauma unit."
Marcus looked up from his cooking with interest.
"That's a big promotion. How do you feel about it?" Terrified and excited, Sarah admitted.
"It would be a huge responsibility, but I think I'm ready for it." "I think you're more than ready," Marcus said with conviction.
"You're one of the most competent and caring people I've ever met.
The patients and staff would be lucky to have you in that role." Sarah felt the familiar warmth that came with Marcus's support and encouragement. Over the past 3 months, he had become not just her boyfriend but her biggest champion and advocate. He believed in her capabilities sometimes more than she believed in them herself. As they sat down to eat, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that frightening night in the parking garage. The woman who had been walking alone and vulnerable through downtown Seattle felt like a different person entirely. She was stronger now, more confident, more aware of both dangers and possibilities. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said as they began their meal. Sarah looked up, curious about the serious tone in his voice.
"What is it?" "I heard from my former commanding officer today. Remember those 4 soldiers from that night we met?" Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth.
She and Marcus rarely talked about that incident anymore, though it remained the foundation story of their relationship.
"What about them?"
"They were all court-martialed last month."
"Turns out that what happened with you wasn't an isolated incident."
"There were other complaints, other women who had been threatened or assaulted."
The investigation turned up a pattern of behavior going back months.
Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, sadness for the other victims, and gratitude that Marcus had intervened when he did.
"What happened to them?"
"Dishonorable discharges for all 4. The ringleader, the blonde sergeant, got 6 months in military prison as well. The others got reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation with the investigation."
"Good," Sarah said firmly. "They brought dishonor to the uniform and hurt innocent people.
They deserve to face consequences." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "The investigator wanted me to know that your decision not to press charges at the time didn't affect the case. They had enough evidence from other incidents to proceed without your testimony."
Sarah had wrestled with that decision for weeks after the incident.
Part of her had wanted to pursue criminal charges, to ensure that the men who had threatened her faced justice. But another part of her had wanted to move forward without the lengthy legal process that would have kept the traumatic experience at the center of her life for months.
"Do you think I made the right choice?" she asked.
Marcus reached across the table and took her hand.
"I think you made the right choice for you at the time. And it turns out that justice found them anyway." Sarah squeezed his hand, appreciating both his support and his honesty. "I'm glad they can't hurt anyone else."
"They can't," Marcus confirmed. "And their victims got the justice they deserved." After dinner, they walked to the nearby park where they had spent many evenings over the past 3 months. It was a beautiful spring evening, with the kind of clear skies that made Seattle's reputation for constant rain seem like a myth. They found their usual bench overlooking the water and sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors.
"Can I ask you something?"
Sarah said, leaning against Marcus's shoulder.
"Always. Do you ever regret leaving the Navy? I know how much your service meant to you."
Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully.
"No, I don't regret it.
The Navy will always be part of who I am, but I'm ready for the next phase of my life.
Ready to serve in a different way. And you're sure Seattle is where you want to be?"
Marcus turned to look at her directly.
"Sarah, I've spent the last 8 years traveling all over the world.
I've seen amazing places and done incredible things.
But I've never felt at home anywhere the way I feel at home with you."
Sarah felt her heart skip a beat at the sincerity in his voice.
"Marcus, I'm not just staying in Seattle for the FBI job," he continued.
"I'm staying because this is where you are, and where you are is where I want to be." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. Over the past 3 months, she had fallen in love with Marcus gradually and completely.
He was everything she had never dared to hope for in a partner: strong, gentle, reliable, passionate about making a difference in the world.
But this was the first time he had expressed his feelings so directly.
"I love you too," she said quietly.
"I have for weeks, but I wasn't sure if it was too soon to say it." Marcus smiled and pulled her closer. "With what we do for a living, both of us, life's too short not to say what matters."
Sarah thought about that truth. Both their professions brought them face to face with mortality on a regular basis.
She saw it in the trauma unit at the hospital. Marcus had seen it in combat zones around the world.
They both understood that life could change instantly and irrevocably.
"Speaking of what matters," Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious.
"There's something else I want to talk to you about."
Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness.
"What is it?"
Marcus shifted on the bench so he was facing her more directly. "We've been together for 3 months, which I know isn't very long by most people's standards.
But, like I said, I don't do casual relationships. When I commit to something, I commit completely." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "Okay. I want you to know that I see a future with you, Sarah.
Not someday in the distant future, but a real, concrete future that we build together."
"I want to know if you feel the same way."
Sarah looked into Marcus's dark eyes and saw sincerity, hope, and just a touch of vulnerability. This man who could face down armed terrorists without flinching was nervous about her answer.
The realization made her love him even more.
"Yes," she said without hesitation.
"I feel the same way. Completely."
Marcus's relief was visible.
"Good. Because I have something for you."
He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "Sarah Martinez," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 3 months ago, you walked into my life in the most dramatic way possible. Since then, you've made me understand what it means to have someone to come home to, someone to fight for, someone to build a life with." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I know this is fast by conventional standards, but nothing about us has been conventional from the beginning.
Will you marry me?"
Sarah stared at the ring, then at Marcus's face, feeling as if time had stopped around them.
3 months was fast, incredibly fast.
But Marcus was right, nothing about their relationship had followed normal patterns. They had started with life and death drama and built from there, learning about each other in the crucible of real crisis and genuine care. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, absolutely yes." Marcus's face broke into a grin of pure joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and Sarah wondered how he had managed to figure out her size without her knowing. "Your roommate helped with the ring sizing," Marcus said, reading her expression. "Jennifer is apparently very good at covert operations." Sarah laughed, picturing her roommate sneaking one of her rings to Marcus. "When did you plan all this?" "I bought the ring 2 weeks ago," Marcus admitted. "I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment." "This is perfect," Sarah said, looking around at the park where they had spent so many evenings together. "Absolutely perfect." As they kissed, Sarah thought about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. A terrifying encounter that could have ruined her life had instead led her to the love of her life. The randomness of it was staggering. If Marcus had been walking down a different street, if he had been 5 minutes earlier or later, if he had decided not to get involved, their paths never would have crossed. But he had been there, at exactly the right moment, and everything that followed had been a direct result of his character and courage. The man who had saved her from physical danger had also saved her from a lifetime of settling for less than she deserved in a relationship. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, pulling back to look at her face. "I'm thinking about fate," Sarah said. "About how sometimes terrible things happen that turn out to be the best things that ever happened to you." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. "If those 4 soldiers hadn't been drunk and stupid that night, we never would have met," Sarah finished. "Which is a weird thing to be grateful for." "Not weird at all," Marcus said. "Everything happens for a reason, even when we can't see the reason at the time." As they walked back toward Marcus's apartment, Sarah's hand in his, she found herself thinking about the future they would build together. Marcus would start his new job with the FBI in a few weeks. She would apply for the charge nurse position and probably get it, given her qualifications and Marcus's unwavering confidence in her abilities. They would face challenges, certainly. Marcus's job would involve danger, irregular hours, and the stress that came with protecting others. Sarah's work in trauma nursing brought its own emotional demands. But they would face those challenges together, supporting each other through whatever came next. "I want to call my parents tonight," Sarah said as they reached Marcus's building. "And my father especially. He's going to want to interrogate you extensively." Marcus grinned. "I'd be disappointed if he didn't. I want to meet the man who raised the woman I fell in love with." "He's going to love you," Sarah said with certainty. "Military background, strong sense of duty, protective instincts, you're exactly the kind of man he always hoped I'd find." "What about your mother?" "She's going to cry," Sarah said with a laugh. Happy tears. "She's been not so subtly hinting that she wants grandchildren for the past 2 years." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Grandchildren? We should probably discuss that at some point." "Definitely," Sarah agreed. "But not tonight. Tonight is just about us." As they entered Marcus's apartment, Sarah looked around at the space that had become so familiar to her over the past few months. Soon, they would be looking for a place of their own, somewhere they could build their life together from the ground up. The apartment was spartanly furnished but comfortable, reflecting Marcus's military background and practical nature. Sarah had gradually added feminine touches of flowers, colorful throw pillows, photographs of them together. It was becoming a shared space without either of them consciously planning it. "I have an idea," Marcus said as they settled on the couch together. "For our wedding." "Already?" Sarah laughed. "We just got engaged 5 minutes ago." "I know, but hear me out. What would you think about a small ceremony? Just immediate family and close friends." "I've been to too many big weddings that felt more like performances than celebrations." Sarah considered the idea. She had always imagined a large wedding, mainly because that was what was expected. But the more she thought about it, the more Marcus's suggestion appealed to her.
Their love story was intimate and personal. Why shouldn't their wedding be the same? I like it, she said.
Small and meaningful, focused on what really matters.
Which is us, Marcus said, pulling her closer. Everything else is just details.
As they sat together on the couch, planning their future and reveling in their newly confirmed commitment to each other, Sarah reflected on the incredible transformation her life had undergone. 6 months ago, she had been single, focused on her career, and fairly content with a predictable if somewhat lonely existence. Now she was engaged to a man who embodied everything she had ever wanted in a partner, preparing to take on new challenges in her career, and looking forward to a future filled with purpose and love. The change was so dramatic that sometimes she had to pinch herself to make sure it was real. But it was real. Marcus was real, solid, dependable, and completely committed to building a life with her. The ring on her finger was real, sparkling in the lamplight as a tangible symbol of promises made and futures envisioned.
Thank you, Sarah said suddenly. Marcus looked confused. For what? For being exactly who you are.
For seeing those soldiers harassing me and deciding to do something about it instead of walking away.
For being brave enough to step into danger for a stranger. For everything that happened after that.
Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful.
You know what I think? What?
I think we saved each other that night. You were in physical danger, and I helped with that. But I was in a different kind of danger, the danger of becoming so focused on my job that I forgot what I was fighting for.
Meeting you reminded me that protecting people isn't just about eliminating threats. It's about creating space for good things to grow.
Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes again.
That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me. It's true, though. Before I met you, I was a soldier.
A good soldier, but just a soldier.
Now I'm a man with someone to come home to, someone to build a future with. You made me more than I was.
We made each other more than we were, Sarah corrected gently. Marcus smiled and kissed her softly.
Yeah, we did.
As they sat together in the comfortable quiet of the apartment, Sarah thought about the story they would tell their children someday. The story of how their father had rescued their mother from danger, and how their mother had rescued their father from a life without love. It sounded like something out of a movie, too dramatic and coincidental to be real. But it was their story, written in the space of one terrifying night and the 3 beautiful months that followed. It was a story that began with fear and violence but led to love and commitment. A story that proved that sometimes the worst moments of your life could lead directly to the best ones. Sarah looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man beside her who had put it there. Marcus Chen, Navy SEAL turned FBI agent, her protector and partner and the love of her life. The man who had stepped out of the shadows on a dark Seattle night and changed everything. I love you, she said again, because it felt important to say it as often as possible.
I love you too, Marcus replied. Always.
Outside, the city of Seattle hummed with its usual energy, people going about their lives, facing their own challenges and opportunities, creating their own stories of triumph and heartbreak. But, inside Marcus's apartment, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds were planning a future that would honor both their past struggles and their present love. It was, Sarah thought as she settled more comfortably against Marcus's shoulder, the perfect ending to what had started as the worst night of her life. Or maybe, she realized with a smile, it wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was just the beginning of the most beautiful chapter yet to be written.